The Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture has finally concluded at a cost of almost 1 billion rand. Some have described it as 3 wasted years. After more than 400 hearings and hundreds of witnesses, President Cyril Ramaphosa was the last witness to give oral evidence at the commission as the curtain came down. Explosive evidence of the looting of the state since 2018 was heard. Ramaphosa was questioned on what he had known and done about state capture as the then Deputy President under former President Jacob Zuma from 2014 to 2018 and as head of state thereafter. Professor Mark Swelling, co-author Shadow State, Politics of State Capture, and Conita Hunter, who's the political editor at News 24. Prof. Richard Calland, and public law expert at UCT. In fact, he is the public law expert at UCT, as well as Karen Moon, who's the specialist legal journalist at News 24, as well as Musilo Mutepu, who's the whistleblower and former Trillion Financial Advisory CEO. Join us now this afternoon to make sense and, of course, have a no-holds-barred conversation looking at this. And I'll begin then with you, Karen. When you look at the president, did he go far enough?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that many people would say, well, at least he rocked up at the inquiry. Obviously, if your comparison is with the former President Jacob Zuma, the bar is very low. But I don't think while there was a broad sort of acknowledgement of the state capture project, the way in which it was an organized and collusive practice that was designed to benefit a political elite, there wasn't the specificity that was required, and oftentimes the president's response to searing questions about his own knowledge and understanding was simply to say that he didn't recall and to deny, in some respects, crucial areas of culpability within the ANC for what happened, not least of all the cadre deployment policy that led to so many parastatals being loaded with individuals who clearly had purposes to enable the corruption that occurred at them.
Kanita?
President Cyril Ramaphosa showed up at the inquiry, and I think that he expected people to start clapping hands just by him merely showing up. But that was definitely not enough, particularly because he could not illustrate what actually intangible things he did besides the 2 occasions that he stood against former President Jacob Zuma, and what did he do to stop state capture from the inside. And more importantly for me, what stood out is that he could not give specific answers to what he's done now since he's taken office. And I think that it was not in the general concessions that we were looking for answers. It was actually in the very specific and detailed questions that the president came with no answers.
Prof. Swelling, Conita says he expected people to clap their hands. Did he go far enough?
I don't think he went far enough, but I don't think we could have expected more under the circumstances. I mean, the Zondo Commission in global terms is an extraordinary initiative and institution in terms of a permanent standing committee for a couple of years investigating a whole range of corruption allegations. And for the president to come to that and engage is significant. But you can't expect him as a sitting president to kind of say, yes, I was there, I was in the room, I knew what was happening, and, sorry, I didn't do anything about it. I tried, basically, it's a classic insider strategy of pressure here, pressure there, in order to survive, in order to then make a difference. And then this was in the context of extreme fear, extreme division, extreme manipulation by small kitchen cabinets all over the place. That was the Zuma style.
Prof. Calland?
Well, let me build on what my colleague Stellenbosch Marx just said. One has to attach a huge amount of political realism in assessing this question of whether he went too far or not far enough. He certainly didn't go too far, and he was walking a tightrope between going too far and not going far enough. He was never going to please everyone, and probably not going to please too many people. And the realism that one needs to attach is this, that this is the culmination of a 9-year strategy. In 2012, he made a very difficult political choice, which was to attach himself to President Zuma's bandwagon. He was convinced by other people that the country needed it, the ANC needed it, and that by doing so, he would A, be able to limit to some extent the harm that was being done by Zuma, and B, he would position himself perfectly to be the successor to clean things up. And it's on that basis that we should perhaps measure his success or otherwise. And as Mark says, he's not going to come to this commission and say, well, I failed. He's going to come and say, I did as much as I could under the difficult circumstances that were presented. And of course, the shadow state had formed. And when he says, I didn't know what was going on, in most cases, I believe him.
Mosilo, Karen says he rocked up, but it doesn't look like he showed up. Did he go far enough?
Good evening. I think the answer is yes and no. The president did reveal his long-term strategy in politics, and he played the long game. He said he had some options that he had to consider, and one of them was resigning or staying within and fighting from within. And when we look at the last 9 years of the politicians, the ministers, and comrades that went and spoke out against state capture, they were either reshuffled or left out in the cold. So I think the president saw this political risk, and he played the long game, knowing that under his term as the deputy president, he would have to fight from within, and that strategy has worked. Unfortunately, fighting from within meant allowing certain things to happen. Hence, now we've got the State of Capture Commission that has cost us over R1 billion. But with regards to what he has done since taking office, I mean, I can honestly say that I was a suspect when under the Zuma administration. And as soon as the president was appointed, the NPA no longer regarded me as a suspect, but they were asking me to assist them in fighting the bad guys. He took decisions with regards to having independent panels appointing key positions in crime fighting agencies. We're slowly seeing the fruits of that. So my answer would be yes and no. And I agree with the panel that obviously he could not have said he saw and he failed in acting.
And I'm going to ask you, just to pause there for me, because I am going to probe you on the issue of the treatment that is also subjected to whistleblowers, as we have seen then in the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. But before we get into our discussion, I'd like us then to look at what he had to say around the issue of, the resignation. He says that he nearly resigned as the deputy president of the country in December 2015. And this we know, that famous weekend special, where it comes from. This is when former Finance Minister Des van Rooyen was appointed to oversee Treasury by former President Jacob Zuma. Let's listen back to what he had to say then.
I immediately contacted the then and now ANC Deputy Secretary General, Jessie Duarte, and indicated in a meeting with her that this is what had happened, and I was now really concerned that state capture had reached this level. And I said to her that I would resign my position, Deputy President of the Republic, and I believe that that message was conveyed to the then president. And maybe that would have raised a concern, I don't know. Then there was a flurry of consultations that involved some of the ANC officials expressing disquiet about the appointment of Mr. Des van Rooyen. The then ANC Secretary General Gwede Mantashe, Ms. Duarte, and myself urged the president to appoint another person as the finance minister because the reaction in the financial markets was turning to be quite horrific. And it is then that we urged that he should appoint Mr. Pravin Gordhan.
Karen, should he have resigned?
Well, I mean, in that particular set of circumstances, he didn't have to. He said this was something that I put on the table. He clearly utilized it as a form of leverage to get, Des Van Rooyen, the notorious weekend special, out of office. But that was really a pivot point because he actually described it as what he regarded as the capture of treasury, that this was an attempt to get hold of the key entity in the country that governs budgets, was the major line of resistance to the nuclear deal at the time. Remember, of course, South Africa signing an IGA with Russia just months before, in the year before, to try and push through nuclear power. And Des Van Rooyen in that position would arguably have been potentially, fatal to those efforts to resist that level of pressure. So I think the fact that he utilized his potential resignation as a form of leverage was significant. Had the president refused and defied, I think he would have probably been left with no other choice but to resign if Des Van Rooyen had remained in office.
Prof. Calland, some have said that when the president went to the State Capture Commission, to testify, to give testimony, especially second time around, he was, he needed to be honest about the ANC's role in state capture as well as his role. But others then said that this is a move that could upset a lot of people within the party. So it looked like he was really walking a tightrope in a catch-22 situation.
Walking a tightrope in a catch-22. Yeah, that's probably a good way of summing up the political predicament that he faced on this occasion. It's a good way of putting it. And of course, what you've just said, Bongiwe, captures this, what we often talk about as the two centers of power. The fact that the president wears two hats. He's the president of the ANC and he's the president of the country and head of the national executive. And that was amply demonstrated by the fact that he gave evidence twice during the last few months, one occasion wearing one hat and the other. But of course the two things get very blurred, and therefore some of the questioning captured that blurred nature. And the deployment commission or subcommittee, whatever it is, was really the focal point for that conversation, and rightly so. And whilst ruling parties throughout the world will inevitably want to appoint people that they have political confidence in, and there's probably nothing wrong with that, the problem I think we've reached now, and which Zondo has very usefully surfaced, is the fact that that commission that committee has become simply too powerful, that it has become a veto, a sort of Security Council veto system on all appointments. And the effect of that is this, that good people who are not part of the ANC and its broader machinery simply can't get into government and don't want to get into government. And the effect of that is this, and this is where I think Mr. President Ramaphosa was not pushed enough. The effect of that is this, that he will fail in building what he keeps saying is the need for a capable state if he's limiting the squad of people from whom you can select to be the leadership of that capable state. The ANC is limiting that in a very, very serious and I think grave fashion.
And Prof. Sterling, I mean, lobbying is something that we know happens all the time. Opinions are passed on this and that appointment, and we cannot expect the governing party not to express an opinion on some of the appointments. As the State Capture Commission then maybe said that these should be made public. Do you think that could help at all?
It would help a little bit, but I think the fundamental challenge is exactly what Richard said, that if you want to build a capable state, you can't achieve that by funneling good people through a very, very narrow funnel. You really do need a much wider net to capture capable people. But I think what is significant, though, in this conversation about party and state is that as head of the party and as the head of the state, he categorically said, yes, we accept there was state capture. Now, I was doing research on this stuff in 2017, and the denials were wall to wall. So, there's a significant shift to say, one, there was state capture, and because it happened, it can happen again. And that changes the ballgame, that changes the culture, because now when you start, being involved in a parastatal like I am with DVSA, we're much more careful than ever before.
Juanita, when he started, a lot of focus was on what the ANC knew and why it didn't act sooner. Now that he's done, what does his testimony tell us about the state of the ANC in the country?
I think that, Ramaphosa was very defensive of the ANC's role, which Richard talks about the deployment committee. He was very defensive of the way the party does things, almost, saying that, or having a sense of whataboutism, that, it happens all over the world, especially when he was quizzed around things like judges and the process at the JSC, for example. But at the same time, he looks to the commission in what he calls a washing machine that's going to come and help him in his endeavors to clean up the ANC. And I think it's a little worrying to outsource the reformation of the ANC, to fold your hands and wait for the commission's report, because Zondo said it to the president. He said, but obviously someone's going to take my report on review, so are you not going to take action against someone, for example, and just as by means of example, David Maklobo, for example, who's now a deputy minister in your executive, despite the mountainous evidence that this commission has heard against him, because you're waiting for a final report. You have a report that implicates him. It's called the High Panel Review Report, led by your now security advisor, Sidney Mufamadi, that literally implicates him, and that's just him by example. There's many others as well, right? And so what the president says, yes, we know, but let me wait for the commission. I'm a man of process. You don't have to be a man of process. You don't need to outsource your reformation task to the Zondo Commission. You need to be enabled by it. You need to be guided by it, but you don't need to wait for Zondo to do its work so that you can then clean up house.
And I want to probe you, further on this one, Konita, because it sounds to me then what you're saying is that he is doing what some have said, placing factional politics over what the country needs.
I mean, all presidents do that, right? Their key to political survival is playing factions. And I think that one can't expect Ramaphosa to do anything different to that. But I think that what the Zondo Commission and his appearance before Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo gave President Ramaphosa is to articulate exactly what the reform process will look like. It can't be that you said that your reform process is waiting for the Zondo Commission's report. It ought to say, so far you've heard evidence around the State Security Agency. I've done 1, 2, and 3. You've heard evidence about PRASA. I've done 1, 2, and 3. And yes, he did try to do that regarding, the Political Party Funding Act, which could be applauded. But again, I think that level of, give me more time. And that has been a lot of the Ramaphosa administration is, I play the long game. So you have been president for 4 years. How much longer do you need?
Musilo, one of the reforms that we need to really talk about, this thorny issue of how whistleblowers are treated in this country, the non-protection of whistleblowers. We saw them come before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry talking about how difficult of a time they've had, and also, listening back to some of what you've said as well, it's quite startling. And when you look at this particular area and what the commission is now left with, this particular report that needs to be put together, do you get a sense that things will change on that front? More people will start coming forward?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I appeared at the Zondo Commission in December 2010 on Nene Gate and Praveen Gate and the role of the advisors. Interestingly, it was the reshuffling of a finance minister that made the president threaten his resignation, because myself, not being part of the ANC appointment committee, knew about the firing of Nhlanhla Nene in October 2016. And I was not surprised when it happened in December. And I was at Regiment's capital. And what's even more shocking is that they took that information and traded bonds and made over 600 million rand. But on another note, going back to your question, on the role of whistleblowers and our protection, I made a statement to the Zondo Commission saying that the legislation does not go far enough in protecting us. What the PDA essentially says that you cannot be suspended or sidelined or fired as a result of you blowing the whistle. But what happens when your boss is corrupt and the board is corrupt and the police minister is corrupt and the president is corrupt? So when I decided to go to Tuli Madonsela, my statement was leaked to the Sunday Times. Subsequently, I was charged with 9 criminal charges: corruption, fraud, theft. And the NPA and the Hawks essentially told me that because of the political situation and because of how Trillion was politically connected, they had to expedite my case. I spent 1.2 million rand legal fees, and unfortunately, no institution in South Africa was able to assist me. I was helped by PLAF, who are based in Paris, and they continue today. So I would say that, and also corporate, we are suspended, we are fired, or we resign out of protest. We have this scarlet letter, a whistleblower, and we become unemployable. And when you've seen all the whistleblowers, from the PRASA whistleblowers, Cynthia, Themba Maseko, myself, Bianca, we are all unemployed, and we have not had gainful employment since blowing the whistle. We've lost our livelihood. So I've asked the Zondo Commission if they can put a fund together to reinstate our livelihoods. Luckily for me, as I'm sitting now, I'm now a special advisor to Minister Senzo Mkhulu. We've been reshuffled. So I'm sitting right now at a workshop, and I'm his financial advisor. But I was unemployed for 2 years and almost went bankrupt. So it needs a concerted effort with regards to legislation, corporate hiring us, and also a protection with regards to legislation so that you're not litigated civilly or criminally as a result of you blowing the whistle and exposing corruption. But also corporate saying we want these skills, we want people of integrity to join our organization. And unfortunately, that has not happened. And we also need civil society to just support us and the law firms to assist with our legal challenges on a pro bono basis. Interestingly, now that my profile has been heightened, I've got all these law firms asking to assist me on a pro bono basis, but they had refused prior because they said my case was not of national importance. So we all have to realize as South African citizens that state capture was not an event, and it's not about one person. It requires every single person in civil society, in corporate, together to ensure that we have the support and protection we need. And also those people who have information, when they look at what has happened, they are rather reluctant. And I've also had this conversation with the president that we don't want to wait for the Zondo Commission to happen so that these recommendations are implemented. We need protection now. We need support now. People losing houses, their assets, marriages. It's a sad state of affairs, I have to say.
All right, I'm going to ask us just to pause for a moment. I mean, it's a lot that has been said. As we then, in the next part of this conversation, I want us to talk about cadre deployment and the line that appears to have been drawn there. That some even say that even the recent cabinet reshuffle has made clear that he may not have as much power as he seemed to think he would have had when he came into office, and also then listening back to all these appointments that would have been made while he was then deputy president. President Cyril Ramaphosa insists that the ANC Deployment Committee doesn't appoint candidates for positions in government. Let's listen then to what he told the commission on this.
The real safety for the process is that the Deployment Committee is not the appointing entity. You may well say influence. Yes, political party will always seek to influence, precisely what you were also saying. that maybe if you want to influence, do it transparently. And I would buy into that. Do it openly and say, we support this one and that one. And in the end, even the public does get involved sometimes when there's, nominations for judges or top positions. They will say, this one is preferable. And when that person has not been appointed, there's an outcry that, they left out this one and so on. So influence, yes, but appointment, no. Because in the end, the ANC Deployment Committee is not the appointing structure.
Let's continue then this discussion further. Prof. Calland, influence, yes. Appointment, no. But we don't have the minutes to know that everything was above board.
Yes, well, I'm not sure one can really expect a private club, which is what the ANC is in this area of the law, to be necessarily publishing minutes about these things. That's not to let them off the hook, because what I think, as we've already discussed in this program, this commission, the Zondo Commission, has shown, is the problems with giving such a secretive body that much power. And clearly, that's an important issue for the future. But if you don't mind, because I've kind of made my main points about this issue earlier in the program, I'd like to just reflect briefly on what Ms. Matopo said about whistleblowing, because it's tremendously important. If we're serious about combating corruption, whistleblowers need to be properly protected. And clearly we need to review the Protected Disclosures Act. And I sort of put my hands up mea culpa a little bit, because I was closely associated with the process that delivered that act 20 years ago. And the proposition on which it is based has proved to be faulty, which is that there is a common interest between the employer and the employee. And therefore it requires the employee, the whistleblower, to blow the whistle internally first on the assumption that the employer will accept the message and not shoot the messenger. Sadly, as her case, typical of so many whistleblowers, shows, that was a misconceived notion in South Africa, especially perhaps. So we have to review that act. That has to be reformed. We have to find a better way. But we also have to recognize that the law is an incredibly blunt instrument when it comes to whistleblowing. In the end, organizational culture, political leadership, and the way in which society rewards, protects, and treasures people like Ms. Matopo, who are willing and brave enough to come forward with difficult information at key moments, is going to be the decisive factor. The law is merely an adjunct to that.
Karen, you're nodding?
I think one of the more disappointing aspects of the president's evidence for me was his attitude towards Popo Molefe, who, while he was not a whistleblower, used his position within government, within PRASA, to do his absolute utmost to stop the rot and to present the ANC's top six, which have immense power, which determine the political direction of the party in many respects. About the 79 million rand kickback that had allegedly been paid by to the ANC by businessman Oswald Mahlangu as part of that Swafambo deal with those trains that were too tall for the rails. Now, of course, Mahlangu has come out and given a statement to the Zondo inquiry, no criminal case as yet. But in the context of Molefe going to the Hawks, trying to compel the Hawks to investigate, getting a law firm in to investigate, producing mountains of evidence, going to the minister, fighting tooth and nail, enduring all kinds of public attacks, him and his board, in Parliament, over the fact that they had investigated and spent money on investigations. For the president to turn around and say that it was disingenuous of Molefe to turn to the top six or to feel that they didn't do enough to assist him was very, very problematic for me. And unfortunately, it's reinforcing, this perception that there's almost a victim blaming of whistleblowers that happens. The experiences of whistleblowers in this country, all of them, as Moselo has pointed out, lost their jobs. They were real devastating consequences for these people. In her case, criminal charges. And so what is the message that is being sent when people who do the right thing are not rewarded? It's not so much, we haven't seen, as yet the kind of substantive prosecutions that I think we would like to see, but that may well materialize in the coming months. But the other point is this. Instead, we focus a lot on people must be held accountable, the criminal justice system must work, but we don't focused enough on rewarding, supporting, protecting the people that come out and make these disclosures and risk everything. And until that happens and people feel that they will be supported in that, I don't know that the situation is going to change. And I absolutely agree with her and I agree with Richard. The law fundamentally needs to change, but there needs to be a culture shift. People who speak out can't be demonized, targeted, and undermined. Otherwise, there is simply no incentive for anyone to take that risk.
Prof. Swelling, some have said that, by being within government at the time when all this was happening, he was then complicit to what was happening. And the president says that, no, we were making sure that the fight is from within. Had we left, those who had looted the coffers would have done a worse, job than what they were able to then do. Is that argument convincing?
In general, I would say that it is. And the reason I say that is that we need to have a very nuanced understanding of what was going on. This wasn't a unified power center with some kind of master strategist in control, namely Zuma. It was like a network of kitchen cabinets, all kind of competing with one another, with huge amounts of fear and manipulation and threats at multiple levels. And if you're in that situation, you could argue it's easier to get out. It's easier, it's cleaner, and you'll sleep better at night. But there are many other examples around the world, especially in the former Eastern Europe, where people decided to stay in order to make sure that networks beyond the corrupt core were established, that there were information flows into civil society, into journalism, into academia, and that there was a group that did start to meet quite regularly towards the end of a core group of cabinet ministers, which included Ramaphosa, who really did strategize how the transition was going to take place. And there were network links into broad front politics that was emerging at the time. And that is how political power dynamics work. And he took a decision to stay on the inside. And I think that was a pretty rough decision.
And Koneta, some have said that the president appears to be very comfortable when he talks about state capture in general, but he doesn't seem comfortable then to take us in depth when it comes to details. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I mean, that's not only in relation to state capture, that's just a Ramaphosa response to everything. He steers clear from the specifics if you ask him around anything particularly, and prefers to make sort of broader statements. And so that was not surprising in any way when he brought that same demeanor to the Zondo Commission. But Bongiwe, the thing for me that stands out the most is, I buy 100% what Professor Mark Swelling is saying, and Professor Calland has said earlier around, what could he have done, right? So let's keep that aside. So now you stayed on the inside and you're bearing the fruits of staying on the inside because you're now president of the Republic and president of the ANC. Now what? Now tell us, what was the point of all of that? What was the point of sitting and waiting and buying time? This is what we need to see unfold now. And again, while there has been some reform, while you can point to the appointment of the SARS commissioner and the appointment of the NDP, there is a lot of reform for me that has not happened, and exactly what Advocate Paul Pretorius put to the president, that actually not only was there no reform and no at the State Security Agency, that it actually created what we saw happen in July, as the inaction resulted in that. And the president said that it was not improbable that what was going on in the State Security Agency and effectively the capture of the State Security Agency all of those years led to the inaction of law enforcement, etc., in the July unrest. So what you're seeing now is that hesitance, the long game. We're seeing negative consequences of the long game, and rightfully so. People gave the president the benefit of the doubt when he took over office. But now, 4 years in, one has to reevaluate to say, what happens now? When does one question and say, okay, you are now president? At what point do you say definitively, my predecessor was at the nexus, at the center of a very wide corrupt enterprise that captured the state. Why is it that 4 years later, and after playing that long game, you still cannot mention the names of the people that you suspected or we now believe and know that have been at the center of state capture, that you talk about it in twists and turns. And I understand before you couldn't say much, and one understands, okay, that's the choice you made when you were deputy president. You are now the president of the republic. What are you doing with your power?
And I'm going to pause there for now. When I come back to you, Musilo, I'd really like us to talk about how much responsibility does he have to take, because he was deputy president of the country. He simply cannot then just seek to move on from this. And I'd like to then get your sense then of what you think his responsibility should be. We'll continue with this conversation in just a moment. Thanks for staying with us. Let's continue then our conversation with our panelists, and without any waste of time, Musilo, I'll come to you. How much responsibility does he take, seeing that he was deputy president then?
I think he does owe us an explanation with regards to his inaction, but I, for one, can speak of his action. Our colleagues have said he doesn't like to go into detail. So I'll just go into detail with regards to what I have seen personally. Number one, we start with the replacement of Des van Rooyen with Pravin Gordhan. Now, all I know is that the appointment of the finance minister to replace Nhlanhla Nene was to essentially sign the nuclear deal and to approve the SAA fleet under the chairmanship of Dudu Myeni. And also, one of the advisors of Des van Rooyen was Mohammed Bobat. And I go into lens in my book and captured in all my other testimonies, is that he was supposed to essentially give trillion in regiments insider information with regards to all the large tenders. So essentially, him protesting in that way saved the fiscus billions of rands. Number two, once he was appointed at Nazareth in 2017, in 2018, the boards of Transnet and Eskom and SAA and Denel, under the umbrella of DPE, were changed, and the executives that were aligned to the Guptas were all suspended, fired, and changed. Bobo Molefe went from PRASA to Transnet. Now, having worked at regiments and trillion, all those contracts, billions of rands, were tainted. And I have spent the last 5 years writing affidavits, criminal and civil, assisting all those state-owned companies to recoup their money that was lawfully unpaid. Some, McKinsey has paid back billions, regiments have paid back some money to Transnet, and Trillion is right now under liquidation. They owe the SARS 400 million, Eskom just under 700 million. And that is just as a result of how his power changed the boards and the executive of the state-owned companies. So I'm unable to speak to what he could have done under his tenure as deputy president. But I, for one, have signed hundreds of affidavits due to the fact that he did change fundamentally the board that was aligned to state capture and replace them with capable, ethical leadership. And hopefully we will start seeing, as Carol Mon had said, very large ticket criminal charges coming with regards to the capture of, I would say, the top 7 of the state-owned companies that are under the umbrella of DPE, all of which, and if not all, with the exception of Transnet, are either under liquidation or they require bailouts, but they spent billions of rands on consultants, and that money was supposed to be siphoned off, as we saw with the Zondo Commission money work stream. That those billions went into private hands, went to Dubai and Hong Kong, and are now sitting with the Guptas and the likes of Salim Issa. So I would say that I would commend him with the changes that were within his powers, and that was to change the leadership of the boards and executives of the SOEs.
Prof. Swilling, some have said that he appeared to have downplayed the role that the leader of government business plays as the deputy president, because he says that this is a facilitation role and simply, is a link between parliament and the executive. Some say that he downplayed this. Do you agree with that notion?
Well, the notion of being in charge of government business is a misnomer, is misleading. That's not in practice what the deputy president does. And it's not, you're not in control of the bureaucracy or in direct control of the state-owned enterprises. You are facilitating a whole pile of complex relationships, often really just problem solving when there are blockages. But I do think, though, he obviously knew a lot more than he was letting on. I agree with Catherine that that he seemed to have lost it when dealing with the Popo Malefa issue and PRASA. It is absolutely clear that Popo Malefa and the board, who were also, deployees, were fighting back and saying, we have to save this. And I think that's a pretty good case study where a lot more could have been done, and he could have, in the Zondo Commission, basically come out in support of what the PRASA board was trying to do. It actually reinforces his agenda. I really don't understand why he played it that way. Maybe their personal dynamics, I don't know. So, yeah, this notion of government business, I don't think we must assume that there's a lot of power to actually control the direction of things.
And Prof. Calland, when you look at what the Deputy Chief Justice had to say to him, he said, I need you to identify areas where you say, as the ANC, we've done our homework and we have done a lot of introspection to look at what we should have done that we didn't do, that got us to this place where we're finding ourselves in now, and to avoid then state capture in the future. Were you satisfied with his response that we may not find ourselves here again?
Well, I'm satisfied that he and a group of people around him have now, and in fact for a number of years, been doing, I think, their utmost to try and firstly arrest the project of state capture, and secondly to push it back, and thirdly to reform things so it won't happen again. And that grouping, I actually do take my hat off to them, because I think they've had to operate in the most difficult of circumstances, and I think only they will ever be able to explain to us how difficult it was. That's the level of nuance, the dangers, the threats, the intimidation. As the recent unrest in July showed, what one was dealing with here was a level of organized criminality at the very heart of the state. And it would be a huge misjudgment to underestimate the danger in all respects that posed. And so what the group that was determined to try and stand up to it had to do was to operate within the bounds of what was possible. And it's one of the oldest and most irritating cliches of politics, but politics is the art of the possible. And indeed, Ramaphosa, his whole career, has been really managing that proposition at each point. And the interesting question now is, having become the president in 2017 and 2018, has he understood the power he's had? Has he used it enough? Or has his approach to politics and his apparent risk averseness, does that not suggest that in fact he has less power than we may think he does? That the political inheritance that he got at Nasrec presented him with a very delicate balance of power within the ANC, and he has to operate within that. That's not to excuse him. It's not to let him off. It's simply to explain that political context in which he operates and makes things very difficult. And I think often he does, as I think Juanita Hunter used the expression, a clever one earlier, that he subcontracts a certain amount of his political responsibility, whether it's to the NPA or to Zondo or whatever. And he does that because it's a way of obviously shifting political responsibility and avoiding creating enemies that he regards as unnecessary at this particular point in this very delicate process of renewal and rebuilding.
And unfortunately, we're out of time. Karen, I'm going to give you this one, the last one, in 10 seconds. Let's then look at the back of what was said now. Is he a weak president?
I think one of the telling moments for me was around the Zweli Mkhize issue, where he really had an opportunity to demonstrate very firmly that his administration were not going to replicate the kind of malfeasance and corruption that the previous one had. And I think that, praising Mkhize for stepping down and deferring all kind of decisions to the SIU and not coming out and saying this was the digital vibes issue was problematic and he was necessarily disturbed by it was a telling moment. Ultimately, the president needs to decide whether his aim is to stay in office so that he can continue, whether his commitment to staying in office means that he's going to defer so heavily to a kind of remaining within the political party dynamics of the ANC that he actually effectively becomes ineffectual. And that reformation agenda that he's so intent on pursuing takes a backseat to staying in power. And that would be a great pity.
All right. Thank you to you all for your time. I wish we had more time. This is very an interesting subject. Prof. Mark Swilling, thank you so much for your time. Kanita, Professor Richard Calland, Karen Morn, Musilo Mutepo, thank you so much to you all for your time and insights this afternoon.